Picture a boardroom in San Francisco right now, today. Inside it, a company that has never once turned a full-year profit just got valued at more than the entire airline industry combined. Nobody in that room thinks that's strange. That's the part worth sitting with for a second. This is the story of the AI bubble, whether it's already happening, and why the answer might be more unsettling than a simple yes or no. Here's what doesn't add up. If you ask most people building this technology whether we're in a bubble, they'll admit it, calmly, almost casually, in the same breath they use to announce another multi-billion-dollar raise. That's strange. Usually the people inside a bubble are the last to see it. This time, the people inside it are pointing at it themselves and building anyway. To understand why, you have to look at the actual math behind the spending, not just the headlines about it. Right now, the biggest technology companies in the world are spending an almost unthinkable amount of money building data centers, buying specialized chips, and securing electricity contracts, all to train and run artificial intelligence models. We're talking about capital expenditure in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year across just a handful of companies. To put that in perspective, that level of spending rivals what entire countries spend on infrastructure in a year, except it's coming from corporate balance sheets, not government budgets. Normally, spending that much money would require an enormous amount of matching revenue to make sense, and some of it does exist. But a lot of the actual profit generated directly from AI products, the subscriptions, the enterprise deals, the tools people pay for every month, still falls dramatically short of the amount being poured into building the infrastructure underneath it. So how does the math keep working? This is where it gets stranger. A significant chunk of the money moving through this industry is what's sometimes called circular investment. One company invests billions into an AI lab. That AI lab turns around and spends a huge portion of that same money buying computing power and chips from the company that just invested in it, or from a close partner of that company. Revenue gets counted on one side of the deal, and investment gets counted on the other side, and from a distance it can look like genuine, healthy economic activity. Money is moving, growth numbers go up, but some of that growth is really just the same dollars circling through a small number of companies that all have a financial interest in the story staying exciting. That doesn't automatically mean it's fraud, or even that anyone involved is acting dishonestly. It just means the actual underlying demand can get harder to measure accurately, right at the exact moment everyone most needs an accurate number. Here's a simplified version of how it can play out. A chip maker invests $10 billion into an AI lab. The AI lab uses a large portion of that same $10 billion to lease computing capacity from a cloud provider. That cloud provider, in turn, uses some of that revenue to buy more chips from the original chip maker to build out the next round of data centers. Zoom out, and you'll see three headlines: a massive investment, a massive lease deal, and a massive chip order. Zoom in, and a meaningful share of that activity traces back to the same original $10 billion, moving in a loop rather than three separate pools of new demand. None of that is necessarily illegal or even unusual for a fast-growing industry building out new infrastructure. It's just worth understanding clearly before assuming every headline number represents fresh, independent demand. If you're wondering whether this has ever happened before with new technology, stick around, because the answer might surprise you, and it's the whole reason this video exists. Before we get into that, if you've ever wanted a clearer picture of the actual mechanics behind stories like this one, that's exactly what this channel breaks down every week. The real math sitting underneath big financial headlines. If that's useful to you, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because we're about to get into the part of this story that most coverage skips entirely. In 1996, the head of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, gave a speech warning that markets might be caught up in what he called irrational exuberance, unreasonable optimism, pushing prices far past what the underlying businesses could actually justify. He was talking about the internet. It took roughly 4 more years for that exuberance to actually break. When it did, in the year 2000, the Nasdaq stock index lost close to 78% of its value over the following 2 years. Companies that had never made a dollar of profit, some that had never even shipped a real product, disappeared completely. Here's the detail almost nobody remembers correctly, though. The internet itself wasn't the mistake. The internet turned out to be one of the most transformative technologies in human history. What actually broke wasn't the technology. It was the price everyone had agreed to pay for a piece of it, right at that specific moment in time. Take a company called Cisco. During the dot-com era, Cisco wasn't some speculative unknown. It made the actual routers and switches that ran the physical internet, arguably the safest, most fundamentally sound company you could own if you believed the internet was going to matter. And the internet did matter. Cisco kept growing its real revenue for years afterward. But Cisco's stock price still lost more than 80% of its value when the bubble popped, and took over 2 decades to fully recover to its old high. Being right about the technology and being right about the price were 2 completely different bets, and almost nobody separated them at the time. That's the twist. Almost nobody applies correctly to what's happening with AI right now. Whether artificial intelligence turns out to be real, useful, and economically transformative, and whether the current prices being paid for AI-related companies make sense today, are 2 entirely separate questions. You can be completely right about the first one and still lose a significant amount of money by being wrong about the second. That asymmetry is the actual lesson, and it has almost nothing to do with whether you personally believe AI is overhyped or underhyped. If the technology really is as important as its biggest supporters claim, that still doesn't tell you anything about whether this specific year's prices, spending levels, or circular deal structures are sustainable in their current form. Transformative technologies and financial bubbles aren't opposites. Historically, they've traveled together more often than not, because genuinely important technology is exactly what attracts the kind of excitement that eventually overshoots. So what do you actually do with that, sitting on the outside of all of it, deciding where your own money goes? The mistake isn't having an opinion about whether AI matters. It's letting that opinion answer a completely different question, whether right now is a good time to buy, hold, or bet heavily on any single piece of this story. If you own AI-related investments through a broad, diversified fund, the bubble question matters less, because you're not exposed to any single company's circular deal structure collapsing on its own. If you're holding concentrated positions in a small number of AI companies because the technology feels obviously important, that's the exact moment to separate your belief in the technology from your belief in today's price. The same way believing in the internet in 1999 didn't mean Cisco's stock price that year was actually correct. There's a simple gut check that helps here. Ask yourself whether you'd still want to own this specific investment at this specific price if you had to hold it through a 2-year period where the stock went nowhere or dropped sharply, even while the underlying technology kept improving in the background. If the honest answer is that you're only holding on because you expect the price to keep climbing quickly, that's a bet on sentiment, not on the technology itself. And it's worth knowing the difference before the music actually stops. So here's where this leaves you. Somewhere out there right now, a boardroom is still burning through $1 billion a month, betting that the story keeps working long enough for the math to eventually catch up to it. Maybe it will. Cisco's routers really were the future. That just didn't stop the stock from losing 80% of its value anyway.